Dear Lord, thank you for the strength to rise when life knocks us down. Teach us to lead with grace, forgive with wisdom, and never forget the value of integrity. May this story remind us all that dignity, faith, and perseverance will always pave the way to redemption. Amen. Welcome to Mr. Favor Tales, where broken hearts find courage, and every setback is just the beginning of a greater comeback. Here, stories are more than entertainment. They are life's whispered truths, wrapped in unforgettable journeys. He fired her in front of everyone, but she came back owning the company. Before we dive deep, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Favor Tales. Your support helps us keep bringing you these powerful stories that touch hearts and heal souls. Grayvale Manufacturing smelled like metal and memory. The clang of steel beams, the hiss of welding torches, and the low thrum of machines were the daily rhythm that had soundtracked Maggie Turner's life for over 2 decades. At 42, she wasn't just a part of the company. She was its soul. Every weekday morning, Maggie arrived just after 6 a.m. Her worn thermos steamed with black coffee as she walked the floor. Most mornings, the crew beat her there, but never by much. She wore her steel-toed boots like a second skin, and her hard hat had smudges of graphite and sticker remnants from safety awards gone by. To the untrained eye, she was just another operations director doing her rounds, but everyone who mattered knew better. Maggie could spot a machine issue by ear, predict a shipment delay by intuition, and coach a technician through a crisis like a battle-tested general. She was the kind of leader who remembered birthdays, asked about kids, and never made anyone feel small. More than once, she'd stayed late helping a rookie get through a rough patch, not because it was in her job description, but because that's who she was. Steady Maggie, loyal, reliable, unshakable. It hadn't always been that way. 2 decades ago, she was a newly hired technician with trembling hands and a baby at home. Emily was just 6 months old when Maggie first stepped onto the Grayvale floor. Her husband had walked out 2 weeks prior, leaving behind a note and a box of unpaid bills. There was no time to grieve, no time to wallow. She strapped Emily into her hand-me-down car seat each morning, dropped her off with a neighbor, and hustled to the plant. Maggie's early days were pure grit. She learned by watching, asking, and working overtime until her muscles ached. The older men scoffed at first, a woman in a male-dominated factory, fresh, faced and alone, but it didn't take long before respect followed. She earned her way into their circle, not by force, but by consistency. When she got her first promotion to shift supervisor, one of the foremen, Big Ray, told her, "You're not just holding the line, Maggie, you are the line." Years passed. She rose to operations director, overseeing dozens of employees and machinery worth millions. Emily grew up among the smell of her mother's lunch pail and the faded metal nameplate that read, M. Turner. They'd have dinners together, boxed macaroni some nights, pot roast when the paycheck stretched, and Maggie would tell her about conveyor belts, safety audits, and how sometimes the best leaders were the quietest ones in the room. Maggie didn't have grand ambitions for power. She only wanted stability, a home where Emily could sleep safely, a company that valued sweat over suits. That's what Grayvale had always been, until the board changed. The founder of Grayvale Manufacturing, Harold Gray, had passed the baton to his son, and then to a board that leaned heavily into corporate gloss. The factory was no longer just a plant, it was becoming a brand. There were consultants in tailored suits, glossy brochures with phrases like digital, innovation, and meetings filled with buzzwords Maggie barely tolerated. She didn't hate change. She just hated waste. Wasted time, wasted talent, wasted potential. When new hires came in with sleek PowerPoint decks and no field experience, Maggie quietly raised concerns. When expensive upgrades were suggested that didn't address operational bottlenecks, she politely but firmly disagreed. Still, she tried to adapt. She attended workshops on digital dashboards. She listened to endless strategy sessions, but behind her calm eyes was growing tension. She knew what worked. She had seen Grayvale rise through sweat and precision, not just slogans. One of her brightest protégés during this time was a young engineer named Adam Hayes. Fresh from grad school and eager to prove himself, Adam was sharp and respectful. Maggie took to him quickly. She mentored him, taught him what school hadn't, that a plant ran on people, not just projections. Adam soaked in her lessons. He asked questions, stayed late, even thanked her for guiding him. Maggie saw in him the kind of hybrid leader she hoped would bridge the old and the new. And for a while, it seemed like that would be the case, until the board decided they wanted a new face. Adam's rise was meteoric. At just 32, he was named CEO, the youngest in the company's history. Maggie smiled through the announcement, clapping politely, even shaking his hand. But deep down, she wondered if he was ready. Not for the spreadsheets and press releases, he could handle those, but for the human cost of leadership. Because Maggie knew, leading wasn't about being the smartest in the room. It was about listening when no one else wanted to. It was about showing up, even when it wasn't glamorous. After the promotion, Adam changed. Subtly at first, sharper suits, tighter schedules. Then more obviously, shorter conversations, more delegation, less warmth. He became distant, more aligned with the board than with the floor he once walked beside Maggie. Whispers started making their way around the plant, that the board wanted a new direction, that the old guard was slowing down progress, that Maggie's name was being mentioned in meetings, not as a pillar, but as a problem. She dismissed it at first. She had survived tougher seasons, until the Tuesday morning when everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning in late fall, and the sky was a slate gray that matched the concrete of Greyvale's outer walls. Inside the assembly hall, the buzz was unusual. Word had gone around, all staff meeting at 9. That alone was rare. And it wasn't HR or safety delivering it. It was Adam himself. Maggie entered the large hall with her usual sense of calm. She carried her hard hat under her arm and wore the company vest she'd had since. Her promotion, the one with her name embroidered in fading white thread. As always, she moved through the space like a grounding wire. Steady, unshakable. People nodded to her. Some whispered, "Morning, Maggie." Others gave her silent smiles of comfort. They'd gotten used to looking to her when things were uncertain. Adam took the podium promptly at 9 a.m. He wore a dark blue suit, crisp white shirt, and a look that was oddly detached, not cold exactly, but clinical. It wasn't the face of the boy she'd mentored, not the one who used to linger after shifts asking about supply chains and vendor ethics. "This company has stood for strength and resilience," he began. "But to compete in today's global market, we must evolve. Faster, smarter, leaner." Maggie folded her arms, still and watchful. "We've identified areas of the operation where legacy systems are holding us back," he continued, his voice smooth but rehearsed. "To that end, some leadership changes are necessary." There was a pause, just long enough to make the room shift uncomfortably. He turned toward her. Directly, his eyes not hostile but firm. "Effective immediately, Maggie Turner will be transitioning out of her role as operations director." Gasps, audible, sharp, cutting. Maggie didn't move. For a moment, she thought she'd heard wrong, that maybe he meant someone else. But the room's energy told her otherwise. Whispers rushed like a windstorm across the chairs. Longtime coworkers turned in their seats. Some stared at her with wide eyes. Others looked down, ashamed. Adam went on, his words flat and impersonal. "We thank Maggie for her years of service. Her contributions have been a part of Greyvale's history, but we must move forward with leadership that aligns with our next phase of innovation." Maggie's hands were still. Her heart pounded. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't yell. She sat there, unmoving, while a storm rose inside her chest. In the blur that followed, she gathered her things from her modest office. A cardboard box, the cliché of dismissal, held her daughter's graduation photo. A framed certificate of safety innovation, a few pens, a tiny succulent plant. No security escorted her out. That would have been too cruel even for them. Instead, silence did the job. The hush of workers avoiding eye contact, the kind few who stopped her quietly to say, "This isn't right," or "You didn't deserve this." And then the silence again. When she stepped outside the factory gates, the air was bitter cold. Her breath fogged as she walked to her car, box in hand. The rearview mirror showed her the building she'd once believed would carry her to retirement. Now it felt like a distant memory. Adam had fired her in front of everyone. And worse, he hadn't even looked sorry. That night, she didn't cry. Not in front of Emily. They sat on the couch, a cheap fleece blanket draped over their knees, watching reruns of old cooking shows. Emily, then barely a teenager, sensed something was wrong. "Mom?" she asked, nudging Maggie's arm. "You didn't eat dinner." "I'm just tired, sweetheart," Maggie replied, stroking her daughter's hair. Long day. Later, when Emily was asleep, Maggie sat in the quiet of their small living room staring at nothing. The humiliation washed over her in waves. She wasn't just fired. She had been publicly humiliated, made an example of. And for what? Because she refused to worship at the altar of automation? Because she spoke up when she thought decisions were wrong? Because she still believed that factories were built on people, not performance graphs? Maggie knew she'd been scapegoated. A few months back, a critical delivery had fallen behind schedule. She had warned her superiors, told them that the aging equipment needed downtime for maintenance. They ignored her. And when the shipment lagged, it became ammunition for the board to claim she was inefficient. But the truth was uglier. She'd heard the whispers, that some in the boardroom thought she was too motherly in her leadership, that she lacked aggression, that maybe her attention was split because she had a daughter at home. No one said it outright, but it was there, the weight of unspoken sexism and ageism that had always hovered in manufacturing spaces but rarely named. She thought about Adam, the boy she once helped when he panicked over production errors. The young man she told, "You'll make a fine leader if you remember the floor before the boardroom." Had he forgotten? Or had power changed him? In the following weeks, Maggie drifted. She applied for jobs, but was either overqualified or not the right culture fit. A polite way of saying, "You're old school, and we want new blood." Money grew tight. Her severance stretched, but not far. She considered tapping into her retirement savings, but Emily's future always loomed large. Maggie would do anything, even scrub factory floors again, to make sure her daughter didn't feel the strain. It was during one of these quiet mornings, sipping lukewarm coffee at her kitchen table, that something shifted in her. She wasn't going to stay humiliated. She wasn't going to let Grayvale define the rest of her life. No one was coming to save her. But maybe, just maybe, she could save herself. She opened her laptop, the same old second-hand Dell she'd used for years, and she began again. There was something hollow about the days that followed. Maggie woke up each morning at 5:30 a.m., as if muscle memory refused to let her sleep past the life she'd once known. She would brew coffee, sit at the kitchen table in silence, and watch the sun inch above the rooftops of her neighborhood like it was trying to apologize for how slow healing really was. Job searching became a full-time job. She applied to plant management roles in 3 nearby towns, 2 cities out of state, even one all the way in Colorado. She rewrote her resume, revised her cover letters, and brushed up on digital workflows and agile manufacturing trends. But the interviews came slowly, and when they did, they felt forced. Some were thinly veiled dismissals. Others were enthusiastic at first, until they saw her age. "You're very qualified," they'd say with flat smiles, "but we're moving in a different direction." She knew what that meant. The phrase haunted her. Somewhere in those words was the reality of being a woman in her 40s in a male-dominated industry. Someone with too much experience to be molded, but not enough gloss to impress the modern boardroom. Emily watched her quietly during that time. Maggie never said much, but her daughter wasn't a child anymore. She knew her mother's silence was not peace. It was weight. One afternoon, Emily came home to find Maggie sitting at the dining table, surrounded by rejection emails printed out and scattered like confetti. Maggie had started highlighting keywords, trying to figure out what the companies really meant. "You don't have to do this today," Emily said softly. Maggie blinked. Her hands trembled slightly. I have to. I have to figure out where I went wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom." "They did." That stopped her. Her daughter wasn't bitter or angry, just clear, steady, like Maggie used to be. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Maggie stared at the ceiling and whispered, "God, if there's still a way forward, I'll take it. Just show me." The next day, her phone buzzed with a call from a recruiter she hadn't expected to hear from. Crestline Motors, a small but growing automotive parts manufacturer in the next county, had seen her resume. They liked her blend of floor experience and process management. The role was nothing like what she held at Grayvale. It was a lateral move at best, a smaller title, less prestige, but the offer came with something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. She accepted. Crestline was a different world. Younger, scrappier, messier. The floor was tighter, the systems more digital, and the chain of command flatter. But the people were eager, hungry, willing to learn. Maggie started slow. She didn't assume authority. She listened. She watched how the teams communicated, how data moved through their cloud systems, how engineers used real-time analytics instead of printed logs. It was foreign, not wrong, just different. She started volunteering to train junior supervisors, not because anyone asked, but because she knew how it felt to be new. Within months, she was a known force on the floor again. But what truly changed her life wasn't the machines. It was the night classes. Maggie enrolled in a local community college's evening program in advanced manufacturing systems and business finance. She wasn't doing it for a degree. She was doing it to update her brain, to understand the language of the future. At first, she felt awkward sitting among students half her age. She'd show up in her work boots, exhausted, and try to follow lectures about supply chain decentralization, predictive maintenance algorithms, and lean inventory models. But she learned, slowly, steadily. At home, Emily would quiz her. "What's additive manufacturing again?" "3D printing with metals," Maggie replied one night. "The new frontier," Emily grinned. "You're a nerd now," Maggie chuckled. "Maybe I always was. Just didn't have time to notice." The two became study buddies. Emily with her college prep, Maggie with her industrial transformation notes. It wasn't the life Maggie had imagined, but it was real. Grounded, beautiful in its own way. The silence in Maggie's life began to lift, replaced by focus. She also became strategic with money. Her severance hadn't lasted forever, but she'd used it wisely. She paid off credit card debt, canceled unnecessary subscriptions, and put every extra dime into a high-yield savings account. She began reading financial newspapers, not for headlines, but for patterns. She didn't trust the market, not yet, but she wanted to understand it. At a second-hand bookstore, she found a copy of The Intelligent Investor. She read it cover to cover in 2 weeks. Then she opened her first brokerage account, just a small one, a few $100s. She bought into a modest ETF, then a few shares of a manufacturing company she admired. Each move was small, calculated, and backed by research. She wasn't gambling. She was planting seeds. Emily teased her once. "You're turning into a finance shark." Maggie laughed. "No, I'm just tired of not owning anything." That stuck with her. For years, she'd helped build someone else's dream. Now she wanted a piece of something that couldn't be taken away by a board meeting. Crestline Motors promoted her within 18 months. She didn't expect it, didn't campaign for it, but her combination of old-school instinct and new-school knowledge made her invaluable. She introduced subtle efficiency systems, implemented cross-training programs, and stabilized their chaotic supply chain. Coworkers began turning to her like they once had at Grayvale. "Ask Maggie," they'd say. "She'll know." Maggie never bragged. She just showed up, every single day. And slowly, a thought began to grow in her mind. Not revenge, not resentment, something else, vision. She kept watching Grayvale from a distance. The company made headlines now and then, flashy partnerships, tech initiatives, sustainability pledges. But then came the layoffs, the restructuring, the closed division in Ohio, the lost government contract. Behind the gloss, Maggie saw a pattern. Grayvale was cracking, and she was paying attention. Are you inspired by Maggie's strength so far? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more life-changing stories only here on Mr. Favor Tales, where every setback carries a seed of comeback. Maggie Turner was no longer the woman who walked out of Grayvale holding a cardboard box. 3 years into her new life at Crestline Motors, she had transformed in ways even she hadn't fully realized. Her gait was firmer, her speech more decisive. She had learned how to read financial statements with the same intuition she once used to detect machine vibrations. Her worldview had widened, and so had her ambition, not for titles, but for power that could be shaped into purpose. Crestline had become a temporary home, not a final destination, and that was okay. Because Maggie now understood something she hadn't before. Comfort could be a cage. Growth required motion. The plant manager at Crestline, A kind man named Harold Deems pulled her aside one Monday morning. "You're doing something different," he said with a curious grin. "What do you mean?" "You're working like someone building more than just a career." Maggie smiled faintly. "Maybe the first, He nodded. "Well, if you ever leave us, make sure to write a manual. We'll need it." But Maggie wasn't just working. She was creating something on the side. It started small. Two former colleagues, both of whom had also left Grayvale after the company began trimming experienced staff, reached out to her. They'd seen how she rebuilt herself and wanted to know how to do the same. They met for coffee, then again for lunch. They talked about manufacturing gaps, safety issues, wasted resources, and over time, those conversations turned into brainstorming sessions. By the end of that year, Maggie and her two trusted friends had formed a small consulting partnership, Three Forge Solutions. Their motto was simple: people before process, process before profit. They began helping smaller, family-owned manufacturers stay competitive without sacrificing their people. Maggie's specialty was lean operations. Her partners, Frank, a former logistics wizard, and Dahlia, a brilliant systems engineer, brought technical innovation and vendor network expertise. Clients were modest at first. A local machine shop here, a rural supplier there. But word spread. Their services were effective, personalized, and Maggie's calm, firm presence made clients feel like they were in the hands of someone who actually cared, because they were. She juggled her full-time role at Crestline during the day and spent evenings and weekends building this consulting venture. Emily, now a college freshman studying business and ethics, became her sounding board. "You think I'm crazy?" Maggie asked one evening while preparing dinner. Emily, balancing her laptop on the counter, smiled. "Not crazy, just awake." That hit Maggie deep. Awake. Yes, that's what she was now. Meanwhile, Grayvale continued its slow unraveling. Public relations painted one story, but the numbers whispered another. Quarterly losses, factory closures, lawsuits over defective parts. The board's flashy modernization lacked substance. Then came the big one. A whistleblower leaked that Grayvale's automation project had been plagued with errors. Millions lost. The media pounced. The company's value dropped. Investors panicked. Maggie didn't gloat. She didn't even feel vindicated. She just felt ready. Using her growing income and conservative investments, Maggie had accumulated a significant nest egg. Nothing outrageous. She wasn't a millionaire, but enough to start making serious moves. She hired a financial advisor to help manage her portfolio and begin quiet acquisition planning. Her focus? Grayvale stock. It was trading at its lowest in 2 decades. She bought cautiously at first, just a few shares, then a few hundred. Over time, more. She diversified her investments, but always left a portion of her focus on the company that had once cast her aside. It wasn't revenge. It was strategy. She wasn't trying to bring Grayvale down. She was preparing to lift it up, the right way. Maggie's leadership profile rose within the industry. She was asked to speak at regional manufacturing conferences. Her consulting firm won a mid-sized contract with a tool and die plant, earning them credibility. She even contributed to a white paper on hybrid human-automated plant ecosystems, which was shared across multiple industry networks. One of the keynote attendees who approached her afterward was a former Grayvale client, a vendor who had since pulled out of business with them due to instability. "I always thought you should have been running that place," he said. "They messed up letting you go." Maggie offered a professional smile. "They made space for me to build something new." It was Emily who helped Maggie connect her growth to her past in the most unexpected way. While home for spring break, Emily shared her final project, a paper on leadership ethics. She titled it, "The Cost of Cutting Loyalty, a Case Study in Leadership Misfires." It was based on Maggie's story, with names changed, of course. Maggie read it at the kitchen table, blinking through tears. "I didn't know you remembered all of this," she said. "I watched everything," Emily replied. "Even when you thought I wasn't old enough to understand." Maggie closed the laptop, her hand trembling slightly as it brushed against her daughter's. "Then I guess I did something right." Maggie didn't know it then, but the next phase of her journey would come faster than she imagined. A local news station ran a segment on Grayvale's struggles, featuring interviews with laid-off workers and frustrated shareholders. One of the founding family's heirs, Harold Gray's granddaughter, gave a brief comment. "We're looking for ways to restore Greyvale's legacy. It's time for new hands with the right heart." That night, Maggie stood in her kitchen, staring at the TV with a kind of electricity humming through her veins. She picked up the phone, called Frank and Dahlia. "It's time," she said. "Time for what?" Frank asked. "For us to make an offer. If you're feeling empowered by Maggie's quiet rise, share this story with someone who needs hope. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Mr. Favor Tales, where stories remind us that failure isn't the end. It's the forge that shapes greatness." Maggie Turner had always believed in doing things the right way, not the loudest, not the fastest, but the way that made things last. And for the first time in years, that principle was about to collide with opportunity. She and her 2 consulting partners sat around a modest conference table in their shared office, a converted storage room in a refurbished warehouse downtown. The table still had paint scuffs, the chairs didn't match, and the coffee maker in the corner leaked. But the whiteboard was full of strategy, and the energy in the room was electric. Frank stood beside the board, scribbling with a red marker. "So, hypothetically, we secure backing from the Grays, plus a few investors from our network. We consolidate under Turner Holdings and form a new umbrella to buy a controlling share of Greyvale." Maggie crossed her arms. "Not hypothetically. That's the plan." Dahlia raised her brows. "This is your legacy, Maggie. You sure you want to walk back into the same boardroom that humiliated you?" Maggie's eyes sharpened. "I'm not walking back in as the woman they fired. I'm walking in as the woman who's about to save their company." Silence. Then Frank nodded, slowly. "Let's do it." The next 6 months were a whirlwind of due diligence, legal consultations, equity assessments, and slow but intentional calls to the right people. People Maggie had earned credibility with through a decade of integrity, not flash. Maggie wasn't wealthy by Wall Street standards, but she was resourceful. She leveraged her consulting income, investment returns, and most importantly, relationships. A local angel investor, who once ran a fabrication plant and admired Maggie's ethics-first leadership style, agreed to back her. A small industrial cooperative from the nearby Rust Belt offered a loan in exchange for shares. Even one of Crestline's former executives, now semi-retired, signed on to advise and contribute seed funding. Emily, now interning with a nonprofit that advocated for women in trades, created Maggie's business pitch deck. "Mom," she said, pointing to a slide. "Don't just talk about metrics, talk about people. That's your brand, that's your power." Maggie smiled. "You sound like you're the mom now." Meanwhile, Greyvale stumbled again. The stock dipped after another disappointing earnings report. Internal strife leaked to the press. Anonymous sources hinted that morale was at an all-time low, with whispers of layoffs and major talent exoduses. The founding family, what remained of them, wanted out. That's when Maggie made the call. She met with Caroline Gray, granddaughter of the founder, in a quiet bistro outside Chicago. Caroline was in her 40s, poised and tired. "My grandfather used to say, 'Steel bends, but doesn't break,'" she murmured over coffee. "I think Greyvale's bent too far. It can still be reforged," Maggie said. Caroline gave her a long, weighted look. "You'd bring people back?" "Not just people. Pride," Caroline exhaled. "Then maybe it's time to let you try." And just like that, the seed Maggie had been watering in silence for nearly a decade began to sprout. The next few weeks moved fast. Maggie's team formalized Turner Industries, the holding company that would house the acquisition and future operations. They didn't stage a hostile takeover. That wasn't Maggie's style. Instead, they made a clean offer. Fair valuation, clear terms, no revenge clauses, no overhauls for the sake of ego. The board at Greyvale balked at first. Some even scoffed when they saw Maggie's name. But the numbers spoke for themselves. Her offer was competitive, her backers credible, her vision modern, but grounded in everything Greyvale had once stood for. And the final nail? A petition from the union workers, hundreds of signatures, all vouching for Maggie Turner. That shook the board. The offer was accepted. Maggie didn't walk back into Greyvale's headquarters with a chip on her shoulder. She wore a charcoal gray blazer, simple slacks, and a silver pin that Emily had given her, the word RISE etched delicately across it. Her first stop wasn't the executive suite. It was the floor. The old assembly line, still humming in parts, though slower now. Older workers stopped what they were doing as she approached. Maggie. She nodded. They removed their gloves, shook her hand. Some hugged her. You came back. I never really left, she said. Just took the long way around. Back in the boardroom, the mood was tense. Adam Hayes sat at the head of the table, gray now dusting the corners of his temples. He stood when she entered. Their eyes locked. No words at first, then quietly, Maggie, Adam. He extended his hand. I wasn't sure you'd come back. She took it, firm and polite. I came to rebuild, not to gloat. The room relaxed a notch. She turned to the rest of the board. Let's begin. Maggie laid out her plan, reinvestment in staff training, especially to bridge older workers into tech systems. Establish a scholarship fund for employees' children pursuing trade skills. Create a hybrid operations model that preserved Greyvale's integrity while introducing automation where it mattered, with human supervision. No massive layoffs, no sweeping vengeance. Just vision. Adam, to his credit, listened. When the meeting adjourned, he lingered. I was wrong, Maggie, he said, about a lot of things. She paused. You were young. So was I. It's not about blame anymore. He nodded slowly. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay on. In a support role, Maggie raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I want to learn from you this time. She considered it, then extended her hand again. Then let's work. Greyvale's rebranding began almost immediately. The sign outside the main plant now read, Greyvale Manufacturing majority owned by Turner Industries. The day it was unveiled, Emily stood beside her mother in the lot. This is yours now, she whispered. No, Maggie said, arm around her daughter's shoulder. This is ours. Greyvale had once been Maggie's sanctuary, a space where she'd poured in her sweat, her loyalty, and the best years of her life. Now, standing at the helm of it as the new majority owner, it felt like standing inside a body that had been bruised for too long. From the executive suite windows, she watched the plant floor beneath her hum like an old engine, functional but weary. The building still bore the bones of the company she once knew, but its soul had been tampered with. Efficiency had replaced empathy. Automation had overridden mentorship. And the people? They moved like ghosts under flickering fluorescent lights. Maggie walked the halls every morning now, just like she used to. Only this time, she wasn't a manager. She was the one signing the checks, greenlighting the decisions, and bearing the responsibility if it all fell apart. But that didn't change her. She still stopped to ask people how they were doing. She still leaned in when they talked about their children, their weekend fishing trips, their concerns over bills and health. Only now they looked at her differently. Not with pity or dismissal, but with hope. The reports didn't lie. Greyvale had been slowly crumbling before her return. Years of cost-cutting had left machines outdated and unsafe. Efficiency upgrades had turned into outsourcing disasters. Contracts had been lost due to missed deadlines and poor compliance. Meanwhile, morale was buried beneath a corporate culture that rewarded performance reports over people. Adam, for all his early energy and ambition, had lost control midway through his tenure. He admitted this to her one evening during a quiet walk around the plant. I got caught up, he said. I thought being sharp meant being detached. I thought the only way to please the board was to become them. Maggie nodded. You forgot the floor. He sighed. I forgot you. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Maggie's plan to repair Greyvale wasn't flashy. It was slow, precise, intentional. First, she reinvested in equipment maintenance. Not full replacements, but retrofitted upgrades. She brought back technicians who knew the older machines by name, pairing them with younger engineers to teach each other. The old hands and the new minds, she called it. Second, she created an in-house reskill and rise program, paid retraining sessions, for workers who wanted to transition from traditional roles to tech-focused ones. She worked with local colleges to fund scholarships for plant employees and their children. Every name on those scholarship lists reminded her of Emily, of the nights they studied across the kitchen table, sharing grilled cheese and ambition. Not everyone on the board liked her pace. Some wanted faster returns. Can't we lay off 15% to give the numbers a bounce? One suggested. Maggie's reply was simple. If I wanted to bounce, I'd buy a trampoline. I'm here to build a company. That silenced the room. And over time, even the skeptical board members came to respect her. Because results, slow as they came, were real. Turnover dropped. Customer satisfaction rose. Union complaints diminished. Old vendors returned. New partnerships began to sprout. One day, Maggie stood at the end of the factory floor beside an old steel press that hadn't run properly in 3 years. The technician beside her, Linda, who'd been there almost as long as Maggie had, looked up from her repairs. You remember this beast? Machine 17. Maggie smiled. Broke down the week I got promoted to ops director. Linda laughed. You threatened to marry it if it ran another 6 months. I remember. They laughed together. For a second, it felt like old times. But this time, Maggie wasn't just running the plant. She was rebuilding its legacy. The more she rebuilt, the more she saw how deeply Grayvale had cracked under the surface. There had been corners cut in safety procedures. A few ex-employees had sued quietly, their claims buried in arbitration. A young line supervisor had committed suicide during Adam's tenure. Overworked, isolated, and unacknowledged. When Maggie found the file, her hands trembled. She met with his parents. Offered them everything the company had failed to give: transparency, apology, and support. That moment, more than anything, reminded her why she had come back. Not for redemption, but for restoration. Every decision Maggie made came back to people. She established a Grayvale Family Fund, emergency aid for employees facing housing, health, or legal crises. No questions asked. Just help. She banned non-compete clauses for factory-level workers. No one should be shackled to survive, she said. She put therapy on the benefits plan. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, the cracks began to heal. One morning, Emily visited Grayvale unannounced. She walked the plant floor, wearing a visitor's badge, and watched her mother speak to a group of new hires. Maggie stood with her sleeves rolled up, grease on her fingertips from inspecting a line machine. No job here is beneath leadership, she said, because leadership isn't a title, it's a promise. Later, in the break room, Emily hugged her. You're not just running a company, Mom, she whispered. You're building a nation. Maggie smiled. One paycheck at a time. Success is not always loud. Sometimes it moves quietly like water, carving stone not with force, but with patience. And in the world of manufacturing, where big names and bigger egos often dominated the narrative, Maggie Turner had become an unlikely whisper in the boardrooms. A name passed from one executive to another, always with respect. Call Turner, she'll fix it. That sentence echoed in more than a few company corridors by the time Maggie hit her mid-50s. Though she had returned to Grayvale as its principal owner and stabilizer, Maggie didn't let go of her consulting roots. Three Forge Solutions, the company she built with Frank and Dahlia, continued to thrive, albeit with a leaner team and more selective clients. They no longer needed to chase business. Business chased them. A mid-sized aerospace components manufacturer in Indiana had reached out. In crisis, missing production targets, losing clients, bleeding talent. The CEO had met Maggie years prior at a supply chain panel. He remembered one quote from her. If your best workers are walking away, your numbers look good, they're lying to you. That quote stuck. Now, he wanted her team. Maggie arrived in Indiana with no entourage, no briefcase full of buzzwords, just a notebook and steel in her spine. She spent 2 days walking the floor before making any recommendations. On the third day, she held a private meeting with the executive team. Her diagnosis? You're solving technical issues with financial models. But your real problem is human. The Xu blinked. Human? You've lost trust, Maggie said. And you can't spreadsheet your way out of that. That project turned into one of Three Forge's biggest wins. Within 6 months, the company had restructured leadership, retrained supervisors, and improved output without a single layoff. Employee retention climbed. Union tensions dropped. The CEO publicly credited Maggie's consulting group in a major trade magazine. That article led to a surge in inquiries. But Maggie was picky. She didn't work with companies that treated people like disposable parts, not anymore. Her standards were simple. Respect your workers. Pay them on time. Don't lie about your intentions. If a company couldn't promise that, she passed. Industry insiders began calling her the business whisperer. She laughed when Emily showed her the nickname on LinkedIn. Sounds like I wear silk suits and float through offices. Emily smirked. You kind of do. Minus the silk. One of the biggest moments in Maggie's consulting rise came at a national summit on manufacturing the future, held in Detroit. She was invited as the closing keynote, a surprise to many since the event was usually filled with CEOs from billion-dollar giants. She walked onto the stage in boots and a blazer. No flashy slides. Just a story. She told them about being fired in front of her coworkers, about sitting in silence at her kitchen table while trying to figure out who she was without her job. She told them about community college night classes, soup dinners, and watching her daughter grow up beside her textbooks. And then she told them about coming back, not to prove a point, but to do what needed to be done. Legacy, she said, isn't built by survival. It's built by the decisions you make when no one's watching. The room stood, not out of politeness, but out of reverence. After that summit, offers poured in, seats on advisory boards, invitations to write books, even requests for television interviews. She turned most of them down. She wasn't building a brand. At Grayvale, her presence was a steadying force. She let Adam take on more public-facing duties while she focused on infrastructure. She promoted from within, elevated women into leadership roles, and mentored new talent without asking for recognition. She returned to her early days in spirit, sleeves rolled, ears open. The press began picking up on the turnaround. Grayvale's golden era too, a comeback led by the woman they once let go. That headline made her pause. She didn't save the article, but she did save the letter a former janitor sent her. You remembered my name when I was sweeping floors. Now my daughter's in college because of the scholarship you started. Thank you, Ms. Turner. In private, Maggie was still just Maggie. She still drove her old sedan, still packed lunch some days instead of ordering, still watched documentaries with Emily on weekends. But she had changed in one subtle, powerful way. She no longer second-guessed herself. She no longer apologized for her age, her style, or her instincts. She no longer tried to keep up with younger CEOs, because she realized they were trying to catch up to her. For months after Maggie Turner officially took the reins at Grayvale, the atmosphere within the company teetered between caution and curiosity. The people weren't used to quiet power. They were used to loud memos, cold meetings, and top-down decisions wrapped in buzzwords. But Maggie didn't issue mandates from a pedestal. She made rounds. She asked questions. She listened. And in listening, she gained something Adam never did: the people's trust. It started with little things. New uniforms, not branded for marketing flair, but made of better fabric because the old ones made workers itch in the heat. Name tags with full names, not just first initials. A return of the morning huddle, a 5-minute team circle where anyone could speak. It had been discontinued under the previous regime for being non-essential. To Maggie, there was nothing more essential than being heard. Then came the culture reforms. She gathered her top managers for a Friday workshop she called the Buy-In. The topic? Why we stay. She asked each manager to write anonymously on an index card, what keeps you here? The answers varied. My team has my back. I need to feed my kids. I want to believe in this place again. Then she flipped it. Why would you leave? Those answers were more raw. I'm afraid to speak up. No clear future. Leadership feels distant. Maggie didn't criticize a single word. She nodded, took a deep breath, and then said, let's fix that. She created Grayvale's first leadership listening initiative. Every department head was now required to spend 1 full day per month on the floor, not giving orders, but shadowing, listening, taking notes. They were to end each shift by asking, what can I do better for you? Some resisted at first, said it felt awkward. Then something incredible happened. Supervisors began to see problems they'd missed for years. A machine missing guards, a team member covering for 2 absent roles, a veteran worker eating lunch alone every day for 6 months. Empathy became a KPI, and productivity rose without pushing. Maggie also implemented quarterly anonymous surveys, but unlike the old days, where results were cherry-picked, These were posted in full transparency on the employee portal. Even the ugly results, especially the ugly results. And she responded to them directly, sometimes in town halls, sometimes in handwritten letters. Once, a maintenance worker complained that the break room clock hadn't worked in over a year. Maggie fixed it herself. The next day, a note appeared beneath it. Time moves again. Thanks, Maggie. Then there were the contracts. Maggie renegotiated with key vendors, this time embedding clauses that prioritized local supply chains and minority-owned subcontractors. She insisted on ethical sourcing, even if it cost more. We don't cut corners, she told the legal team. We lead by example. One supplier balked, accused her of being too sentimental. She dropped them without flinching. Grayvale didn't just make steel now. It stood for something. Externally, Grayvale's stock began to stabilize. Analysts noted the Turner effect, modest growth paired with cultural resilience. Industry conferences requested her again, and one major investor remarked, she turned a tired relic into a rising model of ethical capitalism. But Maggie didn't care for the buzzwords. She cared for the people clocking in at 6 a.m. each day. She cared for the young mother who asked for a nursing room and was surprised when Maggie not only approved it, but stocked it with supplies and privacy. She cared for the older worker who said, I've got 5 years left in me, and instead of phasing him out, she partnered him with a fresh apprentice, turning his final years into legacy. One foggy morning, Maggie arrived early and watched from her office window as employees entered through the gates. There were no protests, no tension, just motion, purpose. She poured her coffee and whispered to herself. Adam now served as VP of Strategic Development. He sat 2 doors down from Maggie. They had an unspoken rhythm. He handled the networking, the public speaking, the big picture. She handled the heartbeat. One day, he stopped by her office with a smile. You've rebuilt more than a company, he said. I just reminded them what it already was, she replied. On the wall of the main hallway, Maggie had a quote, painted in large, simple black letters. Do right by your people, and the numbers will take care of themselves. Every new hire read it during orientation. Every old-timer nodded when they passed it. And Maggie? She made sure it wasn't just decoration. It was policy. If Maggie Turner's leadership inspires you, share this story with someone building their own quiet legacy. And remember to like, comment, and subscribe to Mr. Favor Tales, where true leadership starts with listening. The air that morning at Grayvale carried a different kind of stillness, not the nervous silence of uncertainty, but the calm that settles before something long overdue arrives. Maggie parked in her usual spot. The lot was half full, but she always came early. It wasn't about appearances, it was about rhythm. Grayvale, at its best, pulsed with early risers who understood that the heartbeat of industry began before the sun fully woke. She stepped out of her car and inhaled deeply. The scent of steel, engine oil, and coffee drifting from the open cafeteria door. It smelled like a second chance. Inside, the plant floor was alive with its usual controlled chaos. Forklifts humming, safety bells ringing, voices trading instructions. But when Maggie walked through, people still paused. They always did. Not out of fear, but respect. They remembered when she walked these halls in boots and a clipboard. They remembered the day she left with a box in her arms and tears threatening to fall. And they remembered the day her name reappeared, not on the schedule but on the ownership deed. That morning marked 10 years, exactly, since Adam had fired her in front of the entire company. It hadn't occurred to her at first. Dates had stopped being symbolic after the 2nd year of reinvention. But a young floor worker named Leo brought her a coffee and said, 10 years ago today, right? She blinked. 10? He nodded. My dad used to work here. Said you were the heart of the place until they broke it. Maggie smiled gently. We didn't break. We just got quieter. He handed her a folded note. He told me to give you this. Said you gave him his last promotion before he retired. She unfolded it. 5 words, written in neat blue ink. Thank you for believing first. At noon, the board gathered for a ceremonial meeting, not a business necessity, but a tradition now observed once per year, honoring company transformation and renewal. Adam opened the session. Before we begin today's review, he said, glancing toward Maggie at the far end of the table, I'd like to acknowledge something. The room quieted. 10 years ago, I made a mistake, a big one. I let ambition speak louder than gratitude. I failed to understand that leadership isn't about being right first. It's about staying right longest. Maggie met his eyes. They were sincere. I don't need applause, she said. I need everyone in this room to remember that we don't lead for recognition. We lead for repair. The board, once skeptical of her slow, intentional methods, sat straighter now, because results had proved her right. Maggie walked the halls alone afterward. She passed the wall of retired names, each one etched into brass. Hers wasn't there, not yet. But one day, when the time came, she would make sure it read, Maggie Turner, builder, believer, rebuilder. In the cafeteria, she sat across from an old friend, Terry, the former floor technician who had slipped her a farewell card that dark day. I thought you'd leave the state, he said. Disappear. Start fresh somewhere. I did disappear, she said. Right into the life I was supposed to live. He chuckled. Well, you came back loud. No, she smiled. I came back whole. Grayvale's transformation wasn't flashy. There were no viral videos, no ticker tape parades, just people working, machines humming, and a culture healing one choice at a time. And yet, word spread. Quiet thunder. Industry leaders took note. Grayvale became a case study in resilience. Maggie was invited to guest lecture at business schools, not for theory, but for what the professors called applied soul. She went once to speak at a university Emily was attending for her graduate degree in social enterprise. Maggie stood at the podium, surrounded by students barely older than Emily had been when everything fell apart. She spoke of broken systems, ignored voices, and how power means nothing if you don't use it to lift someone else. At the end, a student asked, "What's your proudest accomplishment?" Maggie didn't hesitate. "Coming back without bitterness," she said. 1 month later, she sat with Emily at their favorite diner. 2 grilled cheese sandwiches, tomato soup, a full circle meal. Emily leaned across the table. "You know, I've been offered a job." Maggie's eyes widened. "Where?" "Here, in Grayvale. Local nonprofit partnering with trade schools and manufacturing mentorship programs." Maggie felt her heart tug. "You sure you want to stay here?" Emily grinned. "I'm not staying for comfort. I'm staying for purpose." That night, Maggie walked through the plant once more before heading home. She touched the railing near the conveyor line, the same place she stood the day she was let go. Only this time, her name wasn't whispered in confusion or pity. It was spoken with pride. The same kind of pride that doesn't shout, it just endures. Emily Turner never asked to be her mother's legacy. She had grown up beside the hum of machinery and the quiet grit of a woman who refused to break. A woman who wore boots to work and wisdom like a second skin. But Emily had dreams of her own. She didn't want to follow Maggie's footsteps just because they were laid out clearly. She wanted to choose her own trail. Still, it was impossible not to be shaped by the force of her mother's story. In college, Emily majored in business ethics, a path inspired by watching Maggie's fall and rise. Her professors often said, "Ethics is about the gray areas." Emily would smile and say, "Actually, it's about the Grayvale areas." She knew firsthand that rules without heart were hollow. That companies didn't fail because of numbers. They failed because of people who stopped mattering. Her senior thesis? The Price of Silence, How Listening Could Have Saved a Generation of Workers. After graduation, she interned with a Chicago-based nonprofit focused on women in trades. She led workshops, mentored high school girls curious about industrial careers, and often found herself quoting Maggie. Power should always be practiced, not just possessed. But her heart kept pulling her home, to Grayvale, to the town that once hurt her mother and then healed her. When a position opened at a local foundation aimed at rebuilding trust between trade schools and manufacturers, Emily applied, anonymously. She got the job, and 3 weeks later, when Maggie found out, she wept. They didn't work together directly. Emily wasn't handed a role at Grayvale. She didn't want one. She worked alongside it, building community pipelines, coordinating apprenticeship programs, and offering business seminars to employees who'd never believed they'd understand the language of leadership. She made space for people who never felt like they belonged in suits. One of her first programs funded childcare stipends for single parents in trade schools. I'm building what you never had, she told Maggie. Her mother nodded, tears in her eyes. And more, there was something poetic about the way Emily moved through Grayvale. Workers knew who she was and who she came from, but she carried no entitlement. Just curiosity, compassion, fire. They called her Little Iron, a term of endearment that echoed steady Maggie. But Emily was her own force. In time, the whispers began. Would Emily take over one day? Would Grayvale stay in the Turner line? Maggie overheard the questions. She never answered them directly. Until one day, during a leadership retreat, one of the newer board members asked outright, "Have you thought about grooming a successor?" Maggie leaned back in her chair. "I'm not grooming anyone." A pause. She smiled. "I'm preparing everyone." But privately, she and Emily had talked. "I don't want this handed to me, Mom," Emily said one night as they folded laundry. "It won't be," Maggie replied. "But I'd be foolish not to give you the room to earn it." They agreed on a long-term plan. Emily would take a rotating shadow role in each department, not as the owner's daughter, but as an intern, learning it from the ground up, not just operations, but finance, HR, compliance, even janitorial. "I won't be liked," Emily said. "You don't need to be liked," Maggie told her. "You need to be trusted." It wasn't easy. Some doubted her. Others challenged her credentials. But she never flinched. She listened more than she spoke. She kept a notebook filled with notes, quotes, and small ideas. One of her margin notes read, "Leadership isn't what you take, it's what you carry." By the time Emily completed her shadow rotation, 3 years had passed. She had married her college sweetheart, a mechanical engineer who volunteered at local robotics clubs. They weren't flashy. They shared a one-bedroom apartment downtown and spent weekends volunteering at workforce development events. When Emily told Maggie she was expecting, Maggie held her tight for a long time. "You'll be a better mother than me," Maggie whispered. Emily laughed. "Impossible. But I'll try." When her son was born, a boy with Maggie's eyes and her father's dimples, they named him Noah. Noah James Turner. Maggie held him in the hospital room and whispered, "You come from steel and stories, little one." Emily returned to work 6 months later. She stepped into a newly formed role at Grayvale, Director of Community and Workforce Strategy, a position she had helped write the job description for. It wasn't executive. It was impact. She built partnerships with underfunded schools, created Grayvale's first bilingual orientation packets, launched an employee-led council for inclusivity, and when the mayor visited the plant during a state tour, it was Emily, not Maggie, who walked him through. The board began to see what Maggie had always known. Emily wasn't just next, she was now. The boardroom at Grayvale had changed over the years. Where there had once been high-backed chairs and silent posturing, there were now open seats and intentional collaboration. The oak conference table remained, but the air around it was no longer heavy with fear. It breathed. Still, the day the board unanimously voted to name Emily Turner as the next CEO, the room held its collective breath for a few seconds too long, not because anyone doubted her, but because the moment was bigger than the motion. It was history being corrected in real time. Maggie wasn't in the room during the vote. She'd chosen not to be. She spent the morning on the plant floor, checking on a new hire who had just transitioned from probation to full-time. "Make sure they know your name," she told the young woman as she helped her adjust a safety strap. "And don't ever apologize for speaking up." At 11:16 a.m., her phone buzzed. A message from Adam, unanimous. "She's in. You were right." Again. Maggie didn't respond right away. She simply looked up at the humming machines and let herself feel it. Emily took over Grayvale not with trumpets, but with tenderness. Her first day as CEO, she held a town hall, standing on a wooden crate, in the middle of the warehouse because she didn't want a podium. She told them this: "I didn't build Grayvale. You did. But I was raised in its shadow, taught by its people, and shaped by its story. So I'm not here to lead with ego. I'm here to serve with memory and vision." The room erupted. Not because of title, but because of truth. Her leadership style was nothing like the CEOs in the industry magazines. She didn't make decisions in isolation. She led listening Thursdays, where she walked the floor unannounced, and took notes, not mental ones, but actual handwritten ones. She created a program called Gray to Gold, mentorship between retired Grayvale employees and incoming interns. She opened quarterly strategy meetings to any employee who wanted to sit in and observe, even the janitors. And when a longtime receptionist named Harriet passed away unexpectedly, Emily attended the funeral not as a formality, but as family. She used to sneak me candy as a kid, she told the grieving children. I thought she had magic pockets. Under Emily's leadership, Grayvale didn't just grow financially, it expanded morally. The wage gap closed between genders. New parental leave policies took effect. A partnership with a local halfway house created work opportunities for people rebuilding after incarceration. One former inmate, now a logistics supervisor, said it best. She didn't ask where I came from. She asked where I wanted to go. The media began circling again, eager to write about the mother-daughter empire story. Maggie declined every interview. This is Emily's story now, she said. Mine already spoke. In the quiet of her own life, Maggie began to step back. Not because she was tired, but because she believed in timing. She traveled with friends. She taught guest classes at trade schools. She even started writing a memoir, not for fame, but for Emily's son, Noah. Someday, she said, he'll need to know where he came from. One evening, Emily and Maggie sat on the porch of the house Maggie had nearly lost all those years ago. The sunset was spilling fire across the sky, and Noah was chasing fireflies in the yard. Mom? Emily asked. Did you ever think this would happen? Maggie smiled. No, she said. But I knew we were building something. Even in the ashes, Grayvale was no longer just a company. It was a compass, a reminder that leadership was never about titles or boardroom votes. It was about showing up, over and over again, even when the world didn't. Are you building something worth passing down? Be the kind of leader that makes room for others to rise. Share this story with someone who leads with heart. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Mr. Favor Tales, where the torch isn't just passed. It's earned. Grayvale was quiet after hours. The machines rested. The air held a soft metallic stillness. The lights glowed low across the factory floor, casting long shadows between the conveyors and the break room. It was late, nearly 9 p.m., when Maggie Turner did her final solo walkthrough. No cameras, no assistants, just her. She moved slowly, deliberately. Every corner of the plant held a memory. Over there, that dent in the railing, the result of an accidental forklift turn during her second month as supervisor. She'd stayed after hours with the driver, helping him file the report. In the corner office upstairs, the one with no windows, she'd once cried into her hands after being blamed for a delayed shipment she had warned them about. That emergency shut-off switch by the safety station, she'd installed it herself after a minor incident convinced her no shortcut was worth a finger. And the breakroom fridge? She still remembered the day someone left a cake for her on her birthday, with to Maggie, who never quits, scribbled in icing. As she walked, she noticed something unexpected. Sticky notes, taped here and there, on lockers, desks, benches. Some were signed, others anonymous. She paused and read a few. Because of you, I stayed. You made this place feel like home again. My daughter got into college. Thank you for the scholarship fund. I believed I was just a pair of hands until you reminded me I had a voice. Her throat tightened. She wasn't ready for this. She turned into the back corridor near the tool cage, the same hallway where, 10 years ago, she'd walked out with a box in her arms and shame in her heart. Tonight, it was empty. Peaceful, and in that space, she exhaled everything she had carried. Outside, the wind was gentle. Emily waited by the car. How was it? She asked softly. Maggie held up one of the sticky notes. I didn't know they remembered. Emily smiled. Of course they did. You didn't just change Grayvale, Mom. You raised it. A few months later, a commemorative ceremony was held in Maggie's honor. She tried to keep it small, modest, but the plant workers, past and present, had other plans. They showed up in droves, wearing shirts that read, "Once fired, now forever forged." The mayor spoke. So did the union rep, and even Adam, who now ran a leadership institute bearing Maggie's name. But it was Emily who gave the final speech. She stepped to the podium with Noah on her hip and said, "My mother taught me that failure is never the end. It's the forge that shapes us. That leadership is not about being right, it's about being ready to do what's right. And that family isn't just who you're born to, it's who you build with. The crowd rose. Maggie stood beside them, not in the spotlight, but in the circle. Her official retirement came quietly 2 seasons later. She didn't throw a party. She simply left her office key on the hook, tucked a handwritten thank you note in the top drawer, and drove home with the windows down. Wind in her hair, peace in her chest. At home, she poured a cup of tea and sat on the porch. Noah toddled onto her lap. Emily sat beside them, feet up on the railing. "Think you'll miss it?" Emily asked. Maggie thought for a moment. "I'll miss watching them become better," she said. "But I don't need to be there for that anymore." She looked down at her grandson. "I've already done my part." The sign outside Grayvale remained unchanged for years after. Grayvale Manufacturing. Majority owned by Turner Industries, led by those who listen, not just lead. And inside, the heartbeat of a company once dismissed, once written off, pulsed stronger than ever. Because one woman refused to let her dismissal define her, she came back not for revenge, but to rewrite the story. For herself, for her daughter, for every unseen worker who ever wondered if quiet strength could truly win. If Maggie's journey moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this story with someone rebuilding after loss, someone finding their voice, someone ready to lead, even if no one claps at first. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, comment, and like this video. Because here at Mr. Favor Tales, we believe every story can be a second chance.